that point, the Korean War had started in the summer of 1950. We got married in December of 1950. The draft was on, military draft. One could get an exemption or a delay in the draft if one had a business something to fulfill. So I presented the draft board with the fact that I was fulfilling a contract for translation, and so they put my name down at the bottom, and eventually it came up again, and that excuse wouldn't work anymore, and I reported for induction, and was delighted that I had had that postponement because my papers had originally been stamped USMC, United States Marine Corps. I would have been drafted into the Marines. This time I was drafted into the Army. And at that time, as part of the witch hunt, the Truman-McCarthy era, 1947, Truman and his Attorney General, Tom Clark, had drawn up and published a list of subversive organizations to which government employees could not belong, including the Kindershul in Washington, D.C. But at that time, first you were inducted, and then you were handed the list, are you now or have you ever been? I had already seen the list because it was published in the Freiheit when it was first come out. By that time, the witch hunt had been going on long enough that a discussion on the left as to how to respond had taken place. Those who had relied on the First Amendment were being sent to jail. Only those who relied on the Fifth Amendment could not be, unless there was testimony against them, could not be. So you continued to go through your military training while G2, the intelligence branch of the Army, investigated. So I went because there was also an entrance exam to determine your level of intelligence or knowledge or what have you. When I passed that exam, I was offered officer training school, and I knew better. I said, no, thank you. I don't want officer training school. So I went for basic training to Fort Dix, New Jersey. One of the other draftees and trainees at Fort Dix, draftees with my batch and trainees at Fort Dix, was Mordechai Schechter. And whom I knew from the Federation von der Jiddisch-Redendiker Jugend, and writing for Jugendruf and meeting in Max Weinreich's apartment. Mordechai and I would march around, stroll around the streets of Fort Dix into midnight, arguing about Yiddish. After the 8 weeks of basic training, I was assigned to radio school, which was Morse code, earphones, form of communication at that time. And I quickly learned that unlike any other specialist school in the Army, if you flunked out all the other schools, you went back to the infantry. 8 more weeks of training and eventually shooting rifles at enemies. In radio school, there was a recognition that the ability to remember and hear Morse code at a faster and faster rate was like a talent for music. And if you couldn't get to the 20 words a minute, it wasn't your fault. As long as your academics were okay, then if you flunked out for code, you were not sent back to the infantry, you were given an on-the-job training assignment. So I knew that. So I tried desperately to flunk out on code. But code tests were given Monday morning. I had just come back from a weekend in the Bronx with my wife at 4 o'clock that morning and was so groggy that I wrote down whatever I heard on the earphones, and I kept passing until I finally, and somewhere around, it was an 18-week course, somewhere around the 14th week, I said, I am not coming home this weekend. I am getting a full night's sleep Sunday night so that I can concentrate on flunking, which I did. And I was given on-the-job training as a company clerk in the radio school company. And my job was to guide the graduates of the school through the process of their being shipped overseas. Their insurance had to be in order and all kinds of stuff. And I did that, week after week after week with graduates and learned the system. A security hold could not be permanently assigned anywhere. Had to stay wherever he was. So I'm on-the-job training for however long it was. I get orders to the Far East. Okay, I know better. Hand in all the stuff to the supply sergeant, go off for the same process that I had been guiding men through, and I get to the station where they check your file, make sure all the papers are in order. Hey, Hartman, you forgot to sign this thing. No, I didn't forget. I refused. Oh, you better go back to the company. I go back, start all over again. A few weeks later, orders to Europe. I know the drill. But this time, they didn't check and they passed it. Between the time I left the barracks to get to the main gate at Fort Dix for the trip home, a 2-week furlough before you go on permanent assignment, there were calls all over Fort Dix, stop that man. He ain't going anywhere. When I came back, the sergeant said, you've got all those friends down there. I know you've done something. You're pulling some strings. When I find out what it is, boy. So I wound up in a replacement company at Fort Dix for people who are just on their way through from one point to another, except I was permanently in the replacement company. The investigation was completed before I left. There were 4 pages of investigation. 2 pages were about me. A page and a half was about my wife, and half a page was about my parents. And on that basis, I was given a general discharge under honorable conditions. A number of my friends from the Sholem movement who had signed everything and were investigation had nevertheless found their backgrounds, also got a general discharge under honorable conditions, but they wanted to be teachers in the New York City public school system. That's what they had been educated for. So they sued the Army, and they won. And the Army then sent me a honorable discharge asking me to please destroy the previous one. You got to be kidding, destroy it. Badge of honor. The other aspect of the witch hunt is that for about 2 years, my wife and I were part of the Communist Underground, living under different names, essentially providing housing for fugitives from the Smith Act. 4 of those convicted in the first Smith Act trials of the Communist National Committee, 4 did not report for prison and went underground, and 4 who had been indicted were not at home when the arrest the second string leaders were not at home when the FBI came to arrest them. So these 8 were provided housing by people all over the country. My wife and I were one of them. I have recently gotten my FBI files. They are so boring and repetitive, I have not finished reading them in a year, but they do come to something like 150 pages. I'm very proud of that.